Hello, Petal. How you doing? I thought I'd sneak a quick session in because I've got an appointment tomorrow, so tomorrow's going to be a busy day. And I thought, what the heckers? Let's just do another one, just to get myself a little bit ahead of the jump, as it were. And we're on chapter 8 of Faust Among Equals by our wonderful Mr. Thomas Holt. So if you could possibly hit that like button if you do enjoy what I'm doing, I much appreciate it. Thank you to everybody who keeps coming back every single chapter. I appreciate every single one of you, and you know who you are. The comments, the likes, I just really appreciate it because it keeps the lights on. It keeps you bringing you the chapters that you want to hear, hopefully. And of course, any feedback is always welcome because this is all about our little teeny tiny community, which I adore because you are all awesome. And thank you for being you, and thank you for everything you do. I appreciate you. Anyway, enough about the love fest. If you could hit that like button, the notifications bell. I think instant premieres are working as opposed to just having it sort of like at a fixed point each day. You know, I can get them to you as soon as they're done. So yeah, if you hit the notifications bell, helps keep the lights on. Share and subscribe if you want to. It does help the channel, and this is as much your channel as it is mine, and I love to hear your input. Anyway, sorry about all the waffles, just like, you know, blah, things all over the place, but it's all good. Right, so, Chapter 8, Faust Among Equals by Mr. Thomas of Holt. There are few experiences quite as nerve-frayingly horrible as being investigated by the revenue. Hell, especially now that the new management team have taken over, is mild by comparison. For all his faults, the Prince of Darkness is a gentleman, or so Shakespeare would have us believe. The Inspector of Taxes, on the other hand, is an unmitigated bastard. Narrator's note, I do have a very funny story from when I worked at Inland Revenue, and it involved a farmer, a tax return, an overdue tax bill, and, quote unquote, hedgehog's backside with a hot needle would be more effective than getting money out of him. Onwards. A week after receiving the assessment, Lundqvist was dragged out of his well-earned sleep at 3 a.m. by 5 carloads of weasel-faced young men and women in grey suits who walked straight past him as if he wasn't there and impounded his files, records, books and bank statements. When he tried to scare them off with a 20-inch Remington Wingmaster, they impounded that too, murmuring something about discrepancies in his claims of writing down allowance on plant and machinery. Then they gave him a receipt and left. When they'd gone, he sat down and pulled himself together. As soon as he'd managed to overcome the feeling of having all his teeth simultaneously extracted by an army of hamsters, he got on the phone to the duty officer at Pandemonium and demanded to know what they were going to do about it.
"Pardon me,"
said the duty officer.
"Don't give me none of that crap," Lundqvist roared. "Get these guys off my back. Do you realise they've taken all of my records back to 1456? "I'm terribly sorry," the duty officer replied, "but it's completely out of our hands. They're an entirely separate agency, you see. There's absolutely no way we can interfere with—"
Lundqvist managed to keep his temper remarkably well. Apart from formally requesting that Hell use its good offices to have the investigation suspended and formally undertaking to pull the duty officer's kidneys out through his nose if his papers weren't returned by 9:05 the next day, he accepted the situation with a good grace and hung up. And he burst into tears. See, narrator's note, Lundqvist isn't much different from that farmer in response to the request for his information, except I wasn't pulling everything. I was just kind of like helping him fill in his tax return. I digress. Business, he decided the next morning, as usual. The programme for the day was to visit the Delphic Oracle and sweat out of her details of where Faust was hiding. To do this, he needed to get to the airport. Since he was short of ready cash for taxi fares, he popped down to the cash dispenser on the corner, which took his card, informed him that his account had been frozen, and referred him to head office. 10 minutes with a Sykes Fairbairn fighting knife and the piggy bank he kept the gas money in produced just enough loose change to get him as far as the airport, where he waved his credit card at the check-in girl and demanded a seat on the first flight to Athens. The girl smiled politely and asked him to wait just a moment while she ran the routine checks on his card. Fine, he thought, as he slouched disconsolate and ticketless away from the desk.
I can't buy a ticket. I'll have to hijack a plane. No worries.
He was strolling up and down the observation area, casting his eye over the various airliners and deciding which one he liked the look of, when a discreet cough at his elbow made him turn.
"Excuse me, sir," said a weasel-faced man in a grey suit, "but if you were thinking of leaving the country, I'm afraid that's out of the question. Not until the investigation is completed, sir. We'll get a court order if necessary."
Under normal circumstances, the next that anyone would have seen of the young man would have been his head, separated from his body on some railing somewhere. So demoralising, however, is the cumulative effect of having the taxman after you that Lundqvist simply whimpered and walked away in the opposite direction. He found he had just enough change left for the bus fare home. OK, so he couldn't leave the country. Nothing to stop him leaving the century. He phoned his usual firm of time travel agents and asked for a reservation for the 5th century BC, first class, non-smoking, not too near the engine. "I'm terribly sorry, Mr. Lundqvist, but we've had instructions. No credit till further notice."
"But I've got an account!"
Lundqvist screamed.
"Damn it, I've been travelling with you since 500 years before you first set up business. I've got a goddamn gold card. Doesn't loyalty count for anything?"
"I'm afraid your account has been suspended, sir. Court order. Injunction. Terribly sorry, but we can only help you if you can make it cash in advance."
"Tell you what."
Lundqvist was physically shaking with rage by this point, hardly able to hold on to the receiver.
"Take me back to last Thursday, and I'll pay you anything you like. My credit rating will be fine then. I give you my word. Only for Christ's sakes, get me out of here."
"Sorry, sir, but I've got my orders. If you'd care to come round to our offices with the money, we'd be only too pleased." He slammed down the phone and snarled impotently. Then he pulled open his desk drawer, slipped something under his shoulder, and walked out. He couldn't withdraw anything from the bank, huh? We'll soon see about that. "Stick 'em up," he hissed across the counter. "This is a 45 automatic, and I don't care if I use it. 5s and 10s, and take it real easy." "Certainly, sir," replied the cool and efficient girl behind the till. "Please bear with me a moment while I get your money for you." She leant back and called to someone behind the scenes. "Yvonne, could you bring me some more 5s, please? Gentleman robbing the bank." An unseen hand passed her a wad of currency notes, which she dropped into the little perspex shuttle thing and passed it over. "Thank you for calling," she said. "While you're here, can I perhaps interest you in our new range of personal equity plans, specially tailored to meet your individual investment requirements and help you plan for a secure and prosperous future?" Lundqvist had got through the door and had his hand on the door handle of the getaway car when a discreet cough at his elbow made him freeze in his tracks.
"Excuse me, sir,"
said a weasel-faced man in a grey suit,
"but I trust you're going to declare all that. Let me see."
He took the money from Lundqvist's unresisting fingers, counted it and handed it back.
"I'll make that $50,000, which, seeing as how it's the profits of a crime, malfeasance or illegal enterprise, is taxable at your highest applicable rates under Schedule 9, Case 6, plus, of course, grossing up to allow for notional basic rate tax deducted at source, leaves you with—"
The young man produced a calculator from thin air, pecked at it with a moist fingertip, and nodded sagely.
"I make that a deficit of $263, sir, if you'd just sign here, please."
Dazed, Lundqvist signed the receipt, allowed himself to be relieved of the money, and fell limply into his car, where he sat for about 20 seconds until the police arrived, and he had to drive like buggery to shake them off. By the time he'd done that, he'd used up all his remaining petrol and had precisely $1.02 to his name. He dumped the car and walked home.
That's all very well, said Lucky George, but I'm buggered if I'm staying here. I mean, look at it.
He waved his arm in a histrionic gesture and scowled. I think it's very nice, said Helen. A bit suburban, maybe, but...
Suburban?
George turned up the malignity in his scowl.
For pity's sake, woman, the only difference between this and where I've just come from is that you don't have to die to get a visa.
He threw himself into a chair and grabbed a can of beer out of the cool bag. Helen gave him a disapproving look. You're exaggerating a little, I think, she said coolly. No little men with pitchforks for a start, no roaring flames, no...
You're wrong there, George interrupted. Except here, they shove bits of raw meat in front of them and call it a barbie. When I was a boy in Nuremberg, we had a thing. I think it was called an oven. Wonder if the patent's expired, because you could make an absolute fortune.
George! In this light, George thought, with her hair curling like that in the evening breeze, and exactly that tone of voice, she's just like my mother, and no, I will not eat up my nice parsnips. It's only temporary, she went on, until...
Temporary? George grinned. I don't think so, love. This is one case where you can't simply outlive the bastards. You know what that pompous little toad of a finance director told me the other day? You can hide, but you can't run. He was right, and, he added, draining the last of the beer and crumpling the can in his fist, there's no percentage in hiding, none whatsoever. It's exactly the same porridge, only with a slightly different tin.
Helen sighed. That's just culture shock, George, she said. We don't have to stay in Sydney, you know. It's a huge country. There's bits of it not even properly explored yet. We could go anywhere.
Marvellous. George rubbed his eyes wearily. We can go and live in the middle of the bloody desert. Hell may not be all fun and games, but at least they've got hot and cold running water.
He considered for a moment.
Hot water, anyway. All the hot water you can use. Free. Bit like an Aga.
Give it a try.
What? Go straight, you mean?
Helen nodded enthusiastically. That's right, she said. We could start a sheep farm or something. It would be fun, George. Really it would. No more magic and being chased about. Just you and me and...
A sheep farm?
Helen frowned. Yes, she said. For my sake, George. Please.
You're serious?
Yes.
He shrugged. I've heard some pretty daffy suggestions in my time, he said. But this has got to be one of the daffiest. You're really saying we should set up a...
Yes!
Okay, then.
He stood up, closed his eyes for a moment, and then smiled. Positively beamed. When he opened his eyes again, they were standing in the middle of a huge, fenceless, featureless wasteland, a wasteland covered in white, seething bodies. From the air it would have looked just like a big manky sheepskin rug.
You got it, said George. Now what precisely do you do with the little buggers to make them grow?
It was 3 months later. Australia is an old country. Very old. At a time when Paris was a soggy fen and Rome herself a little more than a select new development of starter homes for Sabine commuters, the sun-bleached immensity of the outback was already cross-hatched with 100,000 intricate songlines scored on the folk memory and linking the dream time to the nebulous future as directly and reliably as fibre optic cable. Stare at this brain-curdling immensity long enough and your eyes will play tricks on you. You'll start to imagine that. Just look at the destruction test limit of vision. You can make out a tiny black dot moving as slowly as an hourly paid glacier, dawdling across the infinite. You might even take it for a human being. Which it is. This is Chacamara, humming and mouthing his way along the line with the precision of a wire-guided missile and the sense of urgency of a holiday postcard. Around him, the ancestors, perceptible to all the senses except 5, crowded in a happy, shuffling mass, passing him on from hand to hand like a parcel. The song takes him across the flank of a long, low escarpment and to the crest of a ridge overlooking a few thousand acres of dead ground.
"Stone the flaming crows," said
Chacamara under his breath. In front of him was... Well now, yes. A man on a quad bike roared up out of the shadow of the crest and stopped, leaning on his handlebars. "Can I help you?" he said. Jacamara stared at him.
"Sorry, mate," he replied. "I think we've got to cross line."
The man with the bike raised an eyebrow.
"Really?"
he said.
"Too bloody right,"
Jacamara answered.
"How long has this lot been here?"
The man grinned.
"Not long," he said. "Oh, that reminds me. Is your name?"
He dug a scrap of paper out of his pocket and consulted it.
"Jacamara?"
Jacamara nodded.
"Carpet Snake Clan." "Yeah. How did you know?"
Lucky George nodded.
"Message for you from the ancestors. It says, temporary interference with reception. Please do not adjust your reception. We apologize for any inconvenience. C sharp minor, F natural, A sharp with a dot, rest, G natural. That make any sense to you?"
Jacamara nodded, relieved.
"Yep," he said. "It means turn left at the gully and watch out for low-flying aircraft."
He paused, wondering how to phrase his next question tactfully.
"What the fucking hell are you doing, anyway?"
George shrugged.
"Earning a living,"
he replied.
"Any money in it?" "It's early days yet,"
George replied.
"Once it catches on, we'll be laughing. You wait and see."
Jacamara pursed his lips.
"Best of luck, mate," he said guardedly. "Well, I've got him making tracks. You sure it was C sharp minor?"
"Pretty sure."
"Is it important?" "You bet. One wrong note, I could find myself in bloody Tasmania. Much obliged."
He waved solemnly and continued on his way. Through a shallow valley full of sheep, and each sheep was tethered to a post from which hung a scale and a pair of scissors. And in the middle of the valley was a big, brightly painted notice which said, "George's Sheep Farm. Share your own." The one comforting thing about hell is knowing that it can't get any worse. Once you're there, you can't actually get in more trouble. Unless, of course, you run the place. "It wasn't," grumbled the senior accounts clerk, "like this in the old days." He tucked 3 overfilled box files under his arm and scurried off down the corridor. His assistant followed on with a heavily laden trolley.
"Sodding auditors,"
the senior clerk went on.
"In the old days, all we had to put up with was the bursar, and he was one of us. You knew where you stood."
"Better the devil you know, huh?" hazarded his assistant.
"Yes."
The senior clerk stopped to adjust his grip on a file and plunged on.
"What they want with this lot beats me. It's just old lost souls registers."
"We should put all this on computer," mused his assistant.
"Then they'll be really lost."
"Shut up and wheel the bloody trolley." It'd been a long day in a suite of offices assigned to the visiting audit team, but they were damned if they were going to let anyone see it. Mr. Price, Mr. Vincetti, Ms. Khan, Mr. Kowalski, and Ms. Gould of Messrs. Moss, Berwick, Flintlock had worked long and hard to secure the second most impressive prestige client in all accountancy, and they were determined to do the best job they possibly could.
"Thanks,"
said Mr. Kowalski. He hadn't removed his jacket, let alone loosened his tie, and he had a shrewd suspicion that his feet had melted and were seeping out through the eyes of his shoes.
"Just put them on the table over there, and bring us the green purgatory chits for the last 25 years. There's a few anomalies here we'd better get to grips with."
The senior clerk shuffled his feet.
"Actually,"
he said.
"Yes."
Mr. Kowalski raised his head.
"Any problems?"
"Might be tricky,"
replied the senior clerk.
"For the whole period, like. I mean," he added wretchedly, "we just don't have the storage and..."
"Yes."
"It's the economy drive,"
the clerk confessed.
"I mean, the furnaces have got to run on something. So when they said..."
"You've destroyed them."
A look of sheer panic flitted across the clerk's eyes.
"Some of them. I mean, I'm not sure precisely which. It's just,
Mr. Kowalski gave him a nasty look. Although he didn't know it, he was running a severe risk of being the first man ever to be chucked out of hell on the grounds of excessive unpleasantness.
"Don't worry," he said. "Mr. Price will come with you and look for himself. I'm sure we'll find the ones we're looking for."
Sure enough, he did. How the files in question had found their way into the roof space, buried at the bottom of a disused sulphur tank and guarded by a fire-breathing dragon and a triple-headed dog, the senior clerk was at a loss to explain, although he mumbled something about health and safety and storage of bulk inflammable materials. The fire-breathing dragon didn't quite ring true there, but Mr. Price was too polite to say anything. Instead, he looked down about half a mile of nose and snickered. As they trudged back to the file store, the senior clerk stopped from time to time to bang his head against the wall.
"I knew we should have shredded them," he said. "Bloody liability. It just goes against the grain, that's all. Shredding files after all these years. I mean, this is hell. It's about the only place in a sodding universe where they actually respect paperwork."
"Lucky, was it?" inquired his assistant. "Someone been cooking the books or something?" The senior clerk grimaced.
"Worse than that," he grunted. "That's all the Lucky George stuff they've asked for. If they spot that and cross-reference to the visitor's book, they'll sort of realise he's flitted, and then where will we be?"
His assistant glanced round. From each of the dingy cells leading off the corridor came the muffled souls in various ingenious but cost-effective permutations of everlasting torment. "Sorry," she said. "I thought we already were." Her superior sniffed.
"Don't you believe it? That's just the stuff they give their customers."
The third dustbin contained the end of a steel loaf, a sardine tin with a little grimy oil left in it, a rotten tomato, and the carcasses of 2 smoked mackerel. Lundqvist sighed with relief and made himself a sandwich. The neighbourhood alley cat gave him a poisonous look, but he ignored it. Nobody loves you when you're down and out. Admittedly, nobody had loved Lundqvist when he was absolutely loaded, but at least he'd been able to raise the price of a hamburger whenever he felt his ribs prodding their way out of his shirt front. Not that he was a luxurious person by any means, but there is a subtle difference between surviving on roots and grubs because you're in a deep cover 500 miles behind enemy lines and pigging it because the revenue have garnished every last cent you own. The bailiffs had even seized his entire collection of ninja throwing knives and Death Stars, despite his objection that they were tools of the trade and therefore exempt. The most lethal object left to him was a toothbrush. When you're Kurt Lundqvist, however, a toothbrush will do nicely. It's all a matter of knowing how to use it. Once he'd finished his meal, therefore, he walked the 5 miles to the private airstrip on the outskirts of the city and wandered into the first helicopter charter establishment he came across.
"Hi," he said to the youth behind the desk. "I want a chopper now."
The youth looked at him, observing the dusty jacket, the slept-in trousers.
"You want a helicopter?" he said. "Fancy."
Before he could go on, Lundqvist had vaulted the desk, landed beside him, and thrust the toothbrush handle hard into the small hollow just below the lobe of his ear.
"Yeah," he said. "Is that a problem?"
The youth made a low, guttural noise, like a man gargling with custard. Then he raised one shaking hand and pointed.
"Keys in ignition." "Much obliged to you."
He hopped back over the desk and strode quickly across the tarmac to the helicopter indicated. Nobody even tried to stop him. He jumped in and slammed the door. A moment later, he opened it again.
"Hey, you!" he shouted to a cowering mechanic. "Which one of these goddamn levers is the handbrake?"
As he flew, Lundqvist rationalised. He'd found an ancient bar of fruit and nut chocolate in the glove box, a bit grey and fluffy, but the sudden surge in his blood sugar level made his brain roar like the engine of a drag race from the starting line. If I was Lucky George, he asked himself, where would I go? Yes, well, if I actually was Lucky George, I'd cut my own throat this minute because I'd know Kurt Lundqvist was on my trail, and it's only just a matter of time, and I don't want to be sentient when he finds me. That guy is completely something else.
So, I'd go somewhere he'd never dream of looking. 3 alternatives. A, somewhere with lots of people, where I'd melt away into the crowd. B, somewhere so far away and godforsaken, nobody even knows it exists. C, I'd stay exactly where I am.
Yes, well, A was a non-starter, because wherever Lucky George went, the one thing he could never be was inconspicuous. His habit of turning things into other things sort of that. Likewise, C, the Amsterdam authorities are famous for their ability to look the other way when expedient, but even they would have trouble overlooking armies of marauding windmills and giant attack cheeses, which left B. And very good thinking it was too, because the chances of finding him by guesswork were very remote indeed. He was just coming to these conclusions when the radio crackled and addressed him, peculiar in itself since it wasn't switched on.
"Hey, Kurt, my man, give me some skin."
Lundqvist groaned. He really wasn't in the mood.
"Piss off, Bull," he said, "and switch that thing off before you go."
"Don't be like that, man. There's something really heavy going down. And
Later, Bull, okay? I'm busy. And besides, I still owe you a kicking for that last tip-off you gave me, remember?
The radio crackled nervously.
hey, man, that wasn't my fault. How was I supposed to know?"
Rule number 1, Bull. Nobody grasses up the Antichrist, even if he is moonlighting. He wasn't pleased, Bull. We had him down at the station 5 hours before he told us who he was. I nearly got my licence pulled over that one.
Yeah, well, nobody's perfect. This time I got what you want. I got George for you.
Lundqvist jammed a wedge in his adrenaline and raised an eyebrow.
Sure, Bull, he said. You and every other cheap informer between here and Delphi. Go hustle somebody else.
No, man, I'm serious. I know where he is, or, at least, where the girl is.
How?
How?
No, you clown. How do you know where the girl is? Is it just pure intuition, or have you actually seen her?
Let's talk money first.
Lundqvist snarled. Then he took off his tie, jury-rigged the joystick, and put his hands palm downwards in the console.
What you doing, man?
Holding a seance, Bull, and when you materialise, I'm going to kick your ectoplasm up through your ears, okay? Now then, have you seen her or not?
Okay, cool it. The ancestors told me.
I'm losing patience here, Bull, and if you don't come clean before I count to 5, it's going to be 1 sadistic beating for yes, 2 sadistic beatings for no.
I'm telling the truth, man. I heard it from the ancestors. Like in Australia, okay? There's all these wild dudes out there who run the songlines, and they're all in the same union with me. As soon as I heard, I thought of you. I thought.
Australia?
You got it. Place called Maralinga. They don't call it that, of course. They call it D sharp minor, F natural, B natural, G flat. But I looked it up on a map and...
Lundqvist grinned and untied the joystick.
Thanks, Bull, he said. I'll check it out, and maybe I'll let you off with an exorcism when I see you next. And maybe not.
The radio switched off. Ooh. So Lundqvist has been tipped off by Bull to go huffing it over to where George and Helen of Troy are quite happily having a little sheep farm. So they got done over by the gossip from the songlines. So yes, things are getting exciting. So next one is chapter 9 in a couple of days, I hope. Might be tomorrow, might be Monday. Hopefully it'll be one of those two, depending on how tomorrow goes. But we shall see what we shall see. But I think we'll have a new character in the next chapter. So, as always, and I know I repeat this all the time, but, just, algorithm and all that sort of stuff. Let me know how you're doing. Leave me a message in the comments. Tell me a joke. Tell me how your day has been. Let me know what you're doing for the rest of the summer or what you're doing for the weekend. I'm just always happy to have a little bit of a knit in there. I think it's awesome. And you're awesome. So I know I've been whiffling a lot extra today, but just life, You know how things are going, but everything's kind of slotting into place. So that's quite nice. And as ever, if you're interested in any of my Audible books and you would like to have a free code to listen to any of them, just drop me a line on my email and we'll work it out and I'll be able to give you a promo code for a free listen. It's no problem at all. In fact, it's just just makes me happy, because this is something I do that I really enjoy. So if there's anything like that's not on my YouTube channel, it might be on my Audible list, and I think it's about 48 books now, and I've got another 5 in the pipeline, so that'll be 53 by the end of the month, I hope. Yeah. There's wishing, isn't it? Anyway, stay safe, keep hydrated if you're in a place that's too hot, keep warm if you're in a place that's too cold, get lots of good sleep, have lots of lovely self-care time, look after yourselves, and I'll see you soon, Petal. Take it easy. Meow, 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 meow.